get to talk about a bunch of things as we're
Yes,
talking.
yes.
How she's able to just take what God, like people say, if God gives you lemons, make lemonade. And no matter what he threw in her path, she was able to overcome it.
Yes.
She's here to talk about more about what she's doing in her ministry. Please welcome Ersandra Kennebrew.
Yes, I'm doing absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
We're glad to have you here. Amen. We got Ersandra right. We got it right.
Yes.
Amen. Amen. We're glad that you're here. God has done some awesome things in your life.
Yes.
And we need you to go. And I know you've told it before, but I believe that God has somebody watching
Yes.
that needs to be encouraged
Yes.
by where he's brought you from.
Yes.
And we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony.
Yes.
So somebody's going to be strengthened tonight if you would just go share a little bit of that testimony, and then we're going to bring it on in.
Yes.
But share your testimony, and then we'll talk about how you came out of it and the steps that you've taken and that you can teach somebody else to take to come out.
Yes, most definitely. Well, most people are not aware that there are literally 1 million homeless school-age students in America today.
Wow.
It's a fact, and the number is getting larger and larger every day. And although I wasn't homeless as a child, I could have been, because my grandmother had to raise me because my mother was mentally ill and couldn't care for myself or my 3 siblings. So I, being the oldest of us, had to be the one to raise 2 of my siblings. And when they became of age and old enough to live on their own, I became homeless.
Wow.
And in that time, it's really something, because I used to always say, if it wasn't for you guys, I would be somewhere in one room somewhere, and I wouldn't have to have all these expenses. I wouldn't have to live in the suburbs to try to give you the best school and this type of thing. I used to say things like that, and I ended up in one room in a homeless shelter. And it was a situation. I had gone through a divorce, a second miscarriage. The company I worked for went out of business, and they told us in like 30 days we're going to be closing down January 1st, and this business will not be here any longer. And I had worked my way from a stock person to a district sales manager, running 22 stores in 3 states. And here I was beginning a new career, but in the financial crisis that was happening all over the world, a lot of companies shut their doors. And the company I worked for, which had been around since 1923, closed its doors. And there I was. I didn't know how to do anything different. I worked since I was 14 years old. I had no connection with not having a job. And in fact, my identity was wrapped around that job, that company car, that expense account, being able to get on a flight and travel and do these things. They became who I was. And just like our sister said a little bit earlier, God will shake you up. God will shake you up so that you can remember who you truly are. And it's not the job or the title or any of those things that we come to connect ourselves with. And I wasn't even being a wife. It wasn't even being a mother or a big sister caring for my brothers. It was like I had to be stripped all the way down to really discover who God created me to be and what I was to do as a part of my ministry to serve the people of God. And in that period of time is when I learned all of that, because I began, even in the homeless shelter, I was depressed, but what I discovered is that the things I was going through, there were people that were experiencing much greater challenges than I was. I was just without a home, I was just without a job. But in that homeless shelter, there were people who had been raped since they were children. I mean, there were people who had gone through so many situations. I'm talking, it was family members and their mothers knowing about it, and they were just so broken. And I began my ministry right there in the homeless shelter, really supporting young ladies, because it was a shelter for women and children, but supporting them as they try to get back to work. Keeping in mind, you're in a homeless shelter, how are you going to make sure your children have child care and the things that are needed? And so I ended up being a big sister, I guess, if you will, to many of them and watching the children, but they're praying for them and praying with them and just really supporting and guiding them as they make the transitions. And that really helped me to understand what my true purpose in life was. And then my personal development company was birthed a few years after that. And it didn't start off with VKI personal development. It started off with just me writing books. I never thought of myself to be an author, but I had to go back to school. I became a self-improvement teacher. I went to community college and received my associate's degree in mental health, really supporting people in making those self-directed transitions in their lives. And then from there, I became a certified holistic health coach and really pulled in the whole health component and why health is mind, body, and spirit working in symphony. Is not one or the other. You have to have all of these areas working together. And as I learned those things, I developed some programs, and now I'm able to assist people from whatever walk of life they come from. I have clients that are just coming out of homeless shelters. I have people that make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So I can work with people from all backgrounds now.
Wow.
Yes.
All from what you've been through.
Yes.
You found yourself the very place that most people wouldn't want to be. And of course, you did not want to be.
Right.
But that's where your ministry
Yes.
began.
They
Yes.
say, as they say, be careful what you ask for.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was the words I spoke. And I tell my clients the same exact thing. You know, there's a such thing as a poverty mentality. And if you have that mentality, it doesn't matter how much money you're given, it's gonna go away. That's why so many people that have won the lottery end up broke a few years later. It's because they never learned how to manage money. So for that type of person, you can't throw money at them and expect them to hold on to it. So you have to learn some skills. There are some life skills. There's some personal development techniques that you have to learn. And it has to be a lifetime learning experience because we never get to where we can be because there's a thing called human potential, and each person's potential changes as they learn and grow. So the more you do, the more you can do.
Now tell us explain for someone that might not know what personal development actually is.
Okay, well, personal development are the activities and the tools that you use to be your absolute best self. That's the easy way of describing it. And it can be everything from reading books to watching videotapes to attending conferences, conventions, those type of things. Going to church is personal development because personal development includes your relationships, your spirituality, your physical activity, and then it also includes all of those areas that make up your primary, what we call primary foods, because secondary foods are the foods we eat with a fork, but primary foods are the foods that nourish and fill us and feed us even beyond the food that we can eat. And you can have one or the other, but if you are lacking in your primary foods, you will end up eating yourself to death almost because you're trying to fill a void. Whereas if your primary foods are balanced, then you can recognize it's time to push back from the table. You know, so it's really some simple things like that I'm able to support my clients with.
Wow.
Primary foods.
That's good.
That was something that was coined by the founder of the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, Joshua Rosenthal, and I attended that school in New York, and he has a new book called Primary Foods, but it's a different kind of concept because most people only think of foods that you know putting in your mouth. But just imagine, they say emotional eating happens when you've had a bad situation that happens in your life and you start eating in the middle of the night because you're dealing with whatever that trauma that you experienced or that missing that void of relationships. You know, you had a divorce or your husband left you, and then you go and take that pint of ice cream and you eat it because you're trying to get something sweet to match the sweetness that you've lost in your life. And it's a typical thing, but that's what we're talking about when we're talking about feeding and nourishing with the primary foods and then letting the secondary foods come second.
Wow. That's good. I mean, and the way you described it, you're absolutely right. Most people think of primary and secondary foods literally as something that you're ingesting, and then you digest. But you have to digest who you are first.
Yes.
And it prevents all those other
Yes.
downfalls that the spiral.
Yes.
Keeps spiraling out. So personal development. I'm sure it began with you.
Yes, it did.
How so?
Well, it began with me because I had to recognize that I did not have the tools and resources I needed to live the life I wanted to live.
Okay.
That was the first thing.
Okay.
Once you recognize that, then you have to begin to reach outside of yourself and see how can I get those tools and resources. And I have to tell you, if you look at some of the people that are in the personal development industry and they're talking about making $1 million and these type of things, when you're in a homeless shelter, you can't think making $1 million. All you can think of is eating and having a place to sleep at night.
Right.
And so that's kind of where this whole thing came from. I'm like, wait a minute, but people need personal development that are not rich. What about the people that are in those transitions? And so that's why I wanted to create programs that were in budgets that people, no matter where they are, they can move into something and they can begin to grow and nourish themselves and their families, because we're talking about leaving legacies. You know, how can you leave a legacy when you're still living day to day, paycheck to paycheck? You can't even go into 10 years from now, 20 years from now, or 100 years from now. You can't even think that way. So I began to, I lived in Detroit at the time, so the automotive industry had to be retooled, and so did I. That's the way I look at it. I was being retooled by getting some new resources and education. When I wrote that first book, I could barely get some good paragraphs written. I mean, I thought I talked pretty well. I thought I had a pretty good connection with the whole English language and everything, but as I began to write, because a young lady that was one of my clients, she was a literary professor, and she said, if you don't write that book, you'll be doing humanity a disservice. And as I meditated on that, I'm like, humanity? But in fact, it is humanity that is looking and waiting for us to step up to the plate and be all that God has created us to be. Because it's a ripple effect that happens as you do that. And it's like you think you're only maybe touching the person that you have a direct contact with, but it's so much greater than that.
Yes.
With the social media age and the age of just the World Wide Web, people are watching you and they're saying, you look like me, or your story is like mine. And no matter where they are, there's a young lady in Montreal, Quebec, that got on a flight, came to Detroit, Michigan to be a part of one of my workshops. I'm like, how in the world is this possible? But it happened because at the time it was MySpace. She was on MySpace in a chat room, and she saw my words. Those words inspired her to get on a flight. And I thought maybe she must be rich, but when I got to visit her one day, she had me to come to Montreal and pay for my ticket to come and speak to her group. I realized she was driving a car almost like the Flintstones, where you had to put your feet down and run. I mean, she had one of those type of cars, but she valued growing and moving forward enough to invest in herself and get on that flight.
Wow. You said something that was really interesting, where you talked about personal development and the gap, where you said a lot of rich people are talking about personal development, making $1 million, where you were like, hey, I'm only thinking about where I'm going to eat and where I'm going to sleep. And I wanted to go back a little bit about that, because who better needs personal development than homeless people?
There you are. Exactly. You're exactly right. Somehow, there's this thing in the industry that says if a person can't pay you, then you're not worthy of your information. And I was literally taught that in school. They taught me that if a person wasn't ready, willing, and able to pay you for your services, to keep it moving. And I just feel something wasn't right with that in my spirit. I'm like, I don't understand that concept. I know we all need to pay bills and those type of things, but to live only to pay bills is not fulfilling spiritually to me. So for me, I had to do something different.
This was good. You were giving us some great great
No,
knowledge.
I
We
know.
have 30 seconds left. Time flies when you're having a good time.
Yes,
Please
yes.
tell us how we can find out more about your information and about VKI.
Yes, I invite all of the viewers to visit my website, theoptimalplan.com. You can call me at 770-374-0929. I am on Facebook, VKI Personal Development, VKI Personal Development on LinkedIn, and any other social networks, VKI Personal Development.
Okay, thank you so very much for joining us. And we want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget, right here, we are educational.
We're inspirational.
We are community.
Amen.